Kia ora, please have a seat. Tihei mauri ora, e te wātua no te kororia e te ruma e tu nei tēnā koe. Te papa I waho nei tēnā koe. Te mana whenua Ngāti Whātua Rākei, tēnā koutou. Haere mai ki te kaupapa Mindful Money. Haere mai ki te kaupapa. Thank you everybody, thanks for turning up. I'd like to bring on Mr. Barry Coates. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, nau mai, haere mai whakatau mai ki tēnei hui. Ko Barry Coates aho, ko te kairahi o te patea whai whakaro. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to everyone. I'm Barry Coates, co-CEO of Mindful Money. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, David Tikao, for your mihi whakatau to get us started today. So I thought I'd just trace back a little bit where we've come from. It's rather hard to believe that it's now 7 years since Mindful Money was launched, and this is actually our 5th annual conference and awards. We're proud to be a unique organisation in the finance sector, a charity with purpose. Mindful Money came from the recognition that capital is a powerful lever for change, and change is urgently needed. Our mission is to create money as a force for good across the challenges of climate change, biodiversity, and inequality. Our approach has been shaped by the understanding that members of the public would like to align their investments with their values, but they lack the information to do so. When we started, it was impossible to find out where your money was invested and what kind of companies. So now investors can find out. And increasing numbers of those are choosing to find an ethical fund. We've developed a framework that starts with what investors want from ethical investment. Over 8 years of surveys of the public, we have consistent data showing that the public expect their funds to be invested ethically, 3/4 of the population, and they want to avoid certain kind of companies, harmful companies that violate human rights obligations, that practice animal cruelty, that damage the environment, that make weapons, that extract fossil fuels, and they make products that cause social harm. So that's the orientation for our website. That's what we show on our website. It offers unprecedented transparency, updating over 900 KiwiSaver and retail investment funds twice each year. And we actually know of no other service like Mindful Money in any other country, and certainly none that provides all of this information for free. So transparency is a wonderful thing. When the public can see what's in their funds, they will take ethical choices. As an example, we're shocked to find out in 2019 that there was over $100 million of KiwiSaver funds going into making nuclear weapons. Who knew? And so there was public outrage, and we went back to fund providers. And over a period of time, investment halved within the first year of us going to fund providers and saying, this is not consistent with the Kiwi way. Public pressure helped. And then the amount of money dropped further, and now there's around 15 million in making nuclear weapons, and that's primarily from unscreened index funds. So this kind of exposure and pressure makes a difference. We've seen large divestments not only for topical issues like recently highlighting the companies that are supporting illegal settlements on Palestinian land, but also other issues of public concern like tobacco, gambling, human rights violations. So Mindful Money's on a roll. Around 500,000 people have used our website to find out about their funds, engaging with us through events, media, social media, podcasts, seminars with workplaces. And when the typical consumer finds out what's in their website, the most common reaction was, I didn't sign up for this. People expect their providers to behave ethically. So, having got to the stage we're now moving on, we're extending the framework, as well as showing people the companies that members of the public want to avoid. We're now in a process that will show them the things that people really want to invest in, the kind of companies that have positive social and environmental impacts, the things that make people feel really good about their investment. And this reflects the growing interest and the public has shown in the annual surveys around not only investing in dedicated impact funds, but also in impact allocations within mainstream funds. So this will be happening progressively later on this year. We have a saying at Mindful Money that we don't do things because they're easy. We do them because we think they're going to be easy. So for any of you who know the struggles around definitions of impact investment and how hard it is to get to measures of what's positive social and environmental impact, you'll know that it's taken us a little while to get here. So our work is underpinned by leading research. Our current research programs align well with the framework for this conference, investment for the transition. So on climate change, we did a recent research report called Fossil Fuels in Transition or in Denial. And it analysed capital expenditure plans of fossil fuel companies to separate them into categories of those on the 1.5 degree pathway, part of the solution, versus those that are still expanding their exploration and production, and very much part of the problem. So we know that those problems are not only climate problems, increasingly as the transition continues, they're going to be financial problems on a massive scale associated with stranded assets. This year, we will release 2 further climate reports, one a survey of climate commitments across the finance sector in conjunction with the Centre for Sustainable Finance and the Investor Group on Climate Change. But also we're doing comparative data on CRD reports, climate-related disclosure reports, to look at what are some comparative statistics across the CRD reports. The other research focus is on nature. Following our 2023 report on New Zealand investment in global deforestation, we've launched a major deep dive into the role of investment in the health of our precious oceans. Thanks to David Attenborough, we're doing it at a very good time. We'll trace the drivers of ocean degradation, linking it back to the companies that are causing the damage, and ultimately to the investments that are in KiwiSaver and investment funds. This will be coupled with an outline of investments in oceans regeneration. So we look forward to collaborating with others in this exciting project. So we're really thrilled to have amazing panels at this conference to contribute towards a deeper understanding of the role of investment in the transition, specifically looking at these 2 issues of climate and nature. So in order to do all this work, we have an amazing team. Let me introduce our team. So firstly, our very clever co-CEO, Kate Vennell. Kate, over there. the incredibly well-organised COO, Chief Operations Officer, Karen Swainson. Our talented marketing events manager, Tash McGovern. Tash, over there, our event manager for tonight. Data guru, Callum Hobus. Callum, down the corner. Our web maestro, Alex Coton. Alex over there. And super researcher, Sophie Okram. Sophie is there. Great. Thanks, Sophie. And our former digital wayfinder, Olive Coulson, who's now herself in transition to becoming our marketing advisor. So we're deeply grateful to our board, chaired by Paul Richardson. Thank you, Paul. And ably supported by David Tikao, David, Graham Clark, I think maybe not yet, and Bridget Coates, who unfortunately can't be with us. So I hope you'll meet them all today. I'm often asked about Mindful Money's business plan. I explain that we do a huge amount of research and analysis on millions of records of data, and we make this information available on our website in a well-structured format, and then we give it all away for free. So people do tend to raise their eyebrows about our business plan at that stage. But part of our strategy is to build a base of public users and public support for this work. And it's in our mission to make sure this information goes as widely as possible amongst the public. So our next challenge is to seek ways to monetize the services that we provide. Now that we've reached the threshold of 500,000 people who have used that information, then we're developing pathways for users to be able to contribute to our ongoing costs. We get some vital support by generous donations, so we're a charity and our partners include Whakatupu Aotearoa Foundation and Foundation North, and we're very grateful to them, as well as to many generous individuals who provide support to Mindful Money. We're able to put on events such as these, thanks to the sponsorship from our partners. At the time of constrained budgets, we're particularly grateful to the sponsors of this conference, lead sponsor Morningstar Sustainalytics, silver sponsor Stewart Investors, and New Zealand Superannuation Fund, general sponsors Generate KiwiSaver, Craig Investment Partners, Beta Shares and Trust Investments. So thank you to all our sponsors. So our strategy also recognises the analysis and information we have is valuable to the financial sector. So we're now starting to provide services on a commercial basis. For example, we provide ethical reviews for asset owners. Typically, it means an independent review of the alignment of their investment portfolios with the values of the organisation. So current and potential partners include charities, iwi, churches, trusts and foundations, education and health institutions and others. We also provide portfolio analysis and look-through portfolios for financial advisors, and we provide capacity development for other ethical investment institutions. So in all, Mindful Money is doing really well, but we need to strengthen our financial base in order for us to take the next step and grow. And to grow, we want to be able to fulfill our mission more completely. And that's catalysing transformation of the finance sector, the investment sector in particular. So let us know if you have ideas for partnerships or collaboration with Mindful Money. So that's enough about us. On to the conference for this year. This afternoon, we're going to have our opening address. Then we're going to have a panel on the climate transition, and we have fantastic panelists to talk through that. And then a panel on investing for nature regeneration. And we're very grateful for our panelists for coming along and sharing their knowledge and hopefully some nice sparky debate. Throughout the conference, you can ask questions by logging into Slido. And we have there, so you can use your phones and perhaps register now. Get Slido on your phones. We'll also give you a chance to do it later on if you miss out. But this is a way for, during this session, during the speaking session, and then through each of the panels, you'll be able to ask questions of the panelists. Later on, we're going to have our awards evening. I know many of you come here for the conference only. If you want to stay for the awards, it will be a great event and addressed by Florence van Dijk, and with the able kind of shepherding of Jesse Mulligan as our MC. It will celebrate the winners and those with commendations in the area of ethical and impact investment. So, on to the show. It's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Rob Campbell. He's a business leader who brings a real diversity of experience and perspective to New Zealand's boardrooms. He's one of the most respected professional directors with over 40 years' experience across capital markets and business leadership. Rob's also Chancellor of AUT, former chair of Te Whatu Ora, trade unionist and media commentator. He's a passionate advocate for emissions-lowering innovation, sustainability, diversity and equality, and is committed to ensuring Aotearoa leads the way. So please give a very warm welcome to Rob Campbell.
Thank you, Barry. Kia ora tātou. I'd like to first acknowledge Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, old mana whenua for this area. Also to acknowledge the people who've worked for Mindful Money. Over the years, it hasn't been an easy task to build the reputation and role that they have in the financial markets, and I want to acknowledge that contribution, and also to acknowledge each of you for being here today. This topic is not as universally popular as it was perhaps in some years, and many of us will be dealing with corporate and other situations where people are trying to run away from some of the implications we're going to be talking about today. And so it's great that you in your various capacities are here to talk about and consider these options. We're challenged in this gathering to, and I quote, accelerate the transition to a regenerative economy where financial investments are more closely aligned with healthy ecosystems and planetary boundaries. It is a noble challenge. It's an urgent challenge, a tough challenge, and a necessary challenge. Ultimately, it will be a challenge which, for all of its difficulties, will be one about which there will be no doubt. There genuinely, in this matter, is no alternative. I recently read a quite brilliant and moving book. The title is "One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This." The author is Omar El-Akkad, and he exposes how eventually we must accept that things that are too cruel, things that are too destructive, things that are too unfair to work for all, don't work. until we reach that point where we're all agreed on that, we're best to limit and restrict those things which do not work and to promote those things that do work. What I've learned rather late in life is that both the limitation of the negative and promotion of the positive are equally important, not just for our personal sanity, but also to create the new world which can only be born from the world that we are in now. There's nowhere else for it to come from. The seeds, the early shoots, if you like, of the transition are present now, and they need our support just as we unwind the unsustainable systems that we live in. Now, I want to emphasise that I'm not here as an example of good. In my broad career, I've done a lot of opposing things, some of which did turn out to be worth opposing, others not so much. I've also, in my personal corporate governance and investing actions, had what could at best be described as a mixed bag, both financially and socially. You'd have to say I've been a slow learner. Warren Buffett once said, "It's good to learn from your mistakes, but it's better to learn from other people's mistakes." A typical Buffett piece of gentle cynicism and wisdom, I think. But if others can learn from mine, it will help to balance the ledger for me a bit. So that's my aim today, to offer some reflections on this vital transition, and certainly not to give the familiar warning to provide investment advice. There will be a transition to a regenerative economy. The only issues are about how we get there and how we prepare along the way. Now, there have been times in my life when I thought that that might best and perhaps only be achieved by public ownership through the government. I still think of myself as a socialist, one who thinks that the social interest is paramount in everything we do. But I've learned that there are other sustainable and socially responsible models, other ways to combine resources and operate economic activity, which do not simply depend on, or solely depend on, government ownership, from community to Indigenous to other for-purpose or cooperative forms, which include private ownership, of course. Private ownership in these forms does not have to be exploitative or extractive. And we've learned, surely, in recent decades, that public ownership can be exploitative and extractive. In fact, a couple of our SOEs got special orders today to start becoming that if they're not sufficiently so. And we've learned that public ownership, as I say, can have these characteristics. So can cooperatives. So can community or trust-owned organisations. The same thing. The issues to me are about three things: intent, incentive, and inclusion. Not just ownership. It might seem obvious now with experience, but often what the government owns and controls is not as important as who controls the government and what purposes the government pursues. Now, some people might say, well, that's not very socialist, Rob, and I don't think the label mattered very much. Many words have had their meaning and intent destroyed by events and misuse in recent decades. Democracy is a good example. Distorted as a name beyond recognition to justify and recreate imposition of elite power and dominance in most parts of the world. Does anyone really think, for example, that government of the people, by the people, for the people would do to the people and planet what has been done? The regenerative economy that one day everyone will think is the only natural and logical way to run an economy will include a variety of forms of ownership, and we shouldn't limit ourselves in imagining, creating and nurturing that variety. What matters again is intent, incentive and inclusion. Let me expand on this a little bit. intent. If the sole or primary intent of any form of economic activity is to maximise owner profit, then it will lend itself to extractive or exploitative actions. Not always and everywhere, but often enough to be inconsistent with a regenerative economy. It is open to us, simply as citizens, to delegitimise such intent as a sole intent and replace it with a set which is consistent with the necessary economy. That's a choice that we have, a choice we can make. We can change intent. It does not have to be the intent which Milton Friedman was so happy with. Secondly, and these things are associated, incentives. A pretty dry economist that I rather like once wrote that incentives matter. And in fact, he wrote that that is the only important insight of economics. He said all the rest is just commentary. We can change those incentives, is the point. And we can expect, if we do, that behaviour will change as a result. In other words, we do not have to throw the admittedly limited baby of economics out with the bathwater of the sole incentive being profit. Incentives do matter, but private gain at public expense does not have to be the incentive. As the local economist Ganeshi Harao wrote recently, economics is not about money, it's about the future we leave to future generations. As an aside, as you get older you'll find you become more and more used to asides. There's an often quoted saying that money is the root of all evil. It's always annoyed me. It comes from the Bible book of Timothy, and the quote's misleading in the form it's typically used. The accurate formulation is not love of money. Sorry, it's not that money is the root of all evil, but rather that love of money, or greed, or in Latin, cupiditas, is the root of all evil. That idea, for example, has become embedded in Western culture. It forms the central theme of Chaucer's The Pardoner's Tale in the Canterbury Tales. The pardoner explains how he exploits the credulity of others to sell fake items to extort profits for himself. Sounds like a 14th century version of some millionaires and politicians I know of. Inclusion. Historically, the current dominant form of economic ownership and activity, its intent and its incentives derive from the enclosure of common resources. We now see that enclosure from previous centuries, or theft or dispossession or privatisation of common resources in more recent centuries, as natural. But while it has unleashed enormous economic growth, it's also unleashed today's problems. Looking forward, our new economy will have to reverse this exclusionary process and recognise common rights in all resources. This does not mean that private rights are extinguished, but simply that we have to recognise a more complex mosaic or set of layers of rights as being recognised and capable of being enforced. Current efforts in this country to further entrench exclusive private property rights across a full range of laws is simplistic to the point of being brutish. It cuts across everything that we know about complex ecosystems, about planetary boundaries, and about the emerging future regenerative economy. The truth is, though, that we can foster intent, incentive and inclusion which does fit and foster those ecosystems and resource boundaries, or we ignore them at our peril. I refer to these concepts because they emphasise that in our essential transition, we will be realigning some but not all of the ways that we've come to organise ourselves. We've done it before in human history. We've changed how we live to get where we are now, and we'll no doubt need to do so again. Frankly, it's just part of evolution. As Darwin might say, get with it, evolve or die. None of that means that we have to get rid of money or saving or investment. You'll be pleased to know that, Barry. It just means that we have to think about it and organise ourselves in a different way. In simple terms, we need to be mindful and purposeful about it, about how we work and earn, about how we consume and spend, and about how we save and invest. It's not credible to leave the ways in which we work and consume untouched and then put aside some savings and invest those savings in a mindful manner. Not to save and invest mindfully while working and consuming without change. They simply have to go together in a holistic bundle. The transition to a regenerative economy involves the full human experience. Billionaires who think they can extract fortunes from unsustainable practices, then donate the takings to a good cause, are kidding themselves and us. They're reinforcing the old economy, not transforming it. The idea of these people as some kind of modern Robin Hoods starts, we should recall, with robbing. Philanthropy starts often, we should recall, when the rich have had their fill. Transition is about moving beyond robbing and greed. I hope those thoughts are not taking away from more immediate mindful investment issues you'll want to address in the remainder of today. We are fortunate, many of us, to have some savings held either individually or socially or cooperatively in various forms, and how we allocate those does make a difference. Now, it's true that currently vast amounts of capital are committed to a distorted form of regenerative cycle, a destructive cycle which simply regenerates more capital. That does not mean that we should not invest more of what we do have, the ability to control, either individually or socially, to support activities which are regenerative in a deeper sense. Just as we are not condemned to extract, waste and pollute ourselves just because some irresponsible capital owners choose to do so in seeking simply the regeneration of capital. It may not be much, but sometimes all we can do is, in fact, all we can do. We have to be pragmatic about this. We will not be able to extract ourselves completely from a global system of such immense power. Some, often most of what we do in our lives will be marked by, hurt by and supported by that system in various proportions as we head our way through this transition. It can happen because many of us choose it positively, or it can happen because the alternative collapses and it is forced upon us. I don't think it's hard to work out which of those is to be preferred. So it's my appreciation to you all for seeking and implementing what positive alternatives we can. It's important to recognise that this does not require self-abnegation or self-denial or sacrifice. It should be interpreted more positively as an affirmation of our humanity and of an emerging economy consistent with a healthy future. Taking a mindful view of investment is sometimes treated as being a subjective element to what is often seen or portrayed by those working in financial markets as an objective process. Now that suits the models according to which the capital markets may work in the textbooks. But those acting in the actual capital markets know that it doesn't work like that. In those circumstances, people fall back on highly subjective elements such as the tension between fear and greed, or animal spirits, or random walks, or you can run off yourself any number of highly subjective elements which drive the markets on a day-by-day, week-by-week, year-by-year sense. And it's hard to be more subjective than that. Just as another aside, it's not surprised it was the last time, but the last time I got invited to speak to an infants conference, I said that the people there thought they were captains of capital, but in fact they were foot soldiers in the army of capital. and I still think that's true. Being mindful is not being subjective. It's quite the opposite of that, and it's important for us to understand that. Being mindful means simply that we are aware and alert and sensitive to all aspects of experience. In a mindful state, one is not swayed by passing emotions, they're observed as they pass. Mr. Market is not mindful, reacting in different ways immediately to things. In a mindful state, one takes all experience as what it is. It doesn't limit thought to a narrow range of experience, but considers the whole. On this view, it's the narrow, short-term, finance-only approach which is subjective and dangerous. In a mindful state, what one does is not put on blinkers, but take off the blinkers that most traditional financial approaches prefer to leave on. Now, we know that there are negative social and environmental outcomes from many of the ways in which we conduct our economic activities today. Some are currently and others are ultimately destructive of people and planet. The advocates for the blinkered approach, who either choose to ignore harm or risk, or hope that going faster in the same way will ultimately resolve those negative outcomes, like to see themselves as pragmatists or realists, and the mindful amongst us as dreamers. The hard, objective reality is exactly the opposite. Those people are taking risks about the future of people and planet which are blind and reckless. They're choosing current inequitable benefits for some against managing longer-term risks for all. They're gambling with our future. Their risky bet may hit a winning streak for them from time to time, but it will lose for all of us in due course. See, I did learn some things at Sky City. The wise, the mindful, the holistic process is more consistent with everything we know about managing risk, especially social risk. Now, it's true, and I should note in this context, just as I conclude, that there is, of course, an Indigenous way of thinking about these actions, ascribing Maori to a framework of thinking about our economic actions in terms of a life force inherent in whānau community and environmental well-being. There are other such approaches which share being holistic and driven by social outcomes without denying financial outcomes as having benefits too. The truth is that we can incorporate social intent, social incentive, and social inclusion into how we think about investment and all of our economic decisions. As it happens, there's no reason to think that we pay any penalty to do this, but we will certainly pay a big penalty for not doing so. Thank you.
What a great way to start the conference. Thank you so much, Rob. Let's give him another round of applause. Okay, now time for a panel. So, introducing our facilitator, Lachlan Nixon. Come up, panelists up here. Does everyone have a microphone? Mike's there, great. Joe, thank you. Lachlan Nixon is founder and CEO of Motion Capital. He'll tell us a little bit about it. A very warm welcome to Lachlan as facilitator of the panel.
Thank you, Barry.
The sound lady gave me a number. Yeah.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Lachlan Nixon, founding partner at Motion Capital. We have a fantastic lineup here today alongside me, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. But the topic for the panel is unlocking investment in the climate transition. We thought we'd take it as read that with this room, climate change is real and that humans caused it, and that we need to do something about it in finance. So we're trying to talk through practical, specific suggestions for that investment to occur. So I'll let my co-panelists introduce themselves, perhaps starting with Deion.
Okay, good day everyone, Deion Campbell, operating partner at Morrison Global, New Zealand's largest infrastructure investment manager. You may know our biggest client called Infratil, listed on the New Zealand Stock Exchange. The theme of today, Morrison has dedicated itself to ideas that matter. That so far includes data connection for everyone, and renewable energy, and also regenerative farming and healthcare. We, along with our largest client, Infratil, have committed to science-based targets to help where we can in terms of the transition. I'm looking forward to the chat today.
Joe?
Kia ora, Jo Kelly. I am the Chief Executive of New Zealand's Centre for Sustainable Finance. So we're an NGO that is co-funded by industry and the government, we're pleased to say, and we're looking at how we effectively create a financial system that supports a resilient, low emissions economy. Yeah.
And I still don't know exactly how I end up in the situation that I'm in. I am a cherry farmer from Central Otago who is so bad at finance that he had to marry an accountant just to make sure he stayed afloat. But my name is Mike. I'm also the CEO of a climate organisation or energy innovation NGO called Rewiring Aotearoa. So thank you very much for having me along today.
So we've got a bunch of topics to talk about. I've got Slido up here, so if anyone has any questions, please post them in Slido, and I'll probably transition into Q&A. We've got about 35 minutes, so maybe in the last 10 to 15. So firstly, we wanted to talk about KiwiSaver. Obviously, huge and growing amount of capital in our superannuation scheme in New Zealand, of which some is starting to flow into climate transition investment. Joe and the Centre for Sustainable Finance have done some fantastic work on a recent paper on unlocking KiwiSaver for the private markets in the climate transition. I thought Joe might be able to comment a bit further on what it might take to unlock further KiwiSaver capital into the climate transition in New Zealand.
Sure. So we, just to clarify, did a paper on unlocking KiwiSaver and institutional investment into illiquid assets. And that came out of a roadmap that was developed, which is the sort of founding document of the centre, which had a recommendation buried deep in the detail around looking at liquidity requirements for KiwiSaver to support, potential flows into impact investment. And what we found is that is just a number of steps way too far for where KiwiSavers are at. And actually the scope of the work that we did was KiwiSaver investment into private assets, not private assets in New Zealand, not green private assets or transition private assets, just private assets at this stage. So I'll talk about that in a sec, but I thought it might be useful also. We quite often find ourselves in the role at the centre of clarifying things that people take for granted. So I wanted to just speak to what is transition finance or transition investment, because there's a lot of kind of orthodoxies and ways of understanding this, but generally speaking, it's investment that enables high emitting sectors to move toward net zero. And it complements sustainable or green finance, but it's its own category. And it's sort of becoming globally more recognised and important alongside green finance as we start to develop sort of taxonomies and frameworks and disclosures and other, strategies for thinking about how you move money into things that support the resilient low emissions future. Common characteristics are credible transition plans that are aligned to, science-based 1.5 degree pathways, interim targets, measures to avoid greenwashing, and making sure that they're things that are activities that get us to the future that we want. They may not be okay to be doing in that future, but they're okay for now because they're going to help us to get there. So in New Zealand, we've been doing a little bit of work on defining what this could mean. We're developing the New Zealand taxonomy that has a transition category in it. So some of the types of activities, and yay us for putting these out in the public domain in a rigorous and transparent way, which didn't really exist in New Zealand as a national effort prior. In ag and forestry, for example, this could be things like switching to more efficient or electric machinery, ka pai, purchasing renewable energy generation and storage equipment, silvopastoral practices including riparian and shelter belt planting, and adopting new technologies such as methane inhibiting feed. So, you know, it's like pretty granular. It's an activity level definition of things. And the reason for starting with this is because there's a ton of ways of thinking about what transition really is. So then you get to the KiwiSaver work, and I guess we, well, first of all, you don't need to be investing in illiquid assets to be investing in transition. So everybody can be doing that now without the changes to KiwiSaver. But the work we did looked at legislative, policy, regulatory, and behavioural barriers to this type of investing by KiwiSavers. And we found through a legal opinion with Chapman Tripp, Minter Ellis, and Rudd Watts, and an investor working group, that there are no legislative barriers. There are some perceived barriers which we treated as actual barriers, and that relates to things like, you know, FMA sort of position on value for money and the need in the industry for greater clarity on liquidity requirements, and you know, some discussion around portability and the ability to switch your KiwiSaver. So a lot of people who are in that process are in the room. And some of the things we talked about were opting out of portability requirements, putting withdrawals on limit, putting guidance or clarity from the FMA out into the market around their expectations around value for money, side pocketing or separating illiquid assets from the main funds and allowing people to lock in for longer. So all of these nice sort of tweaks, right? But the fact of the matter is there's actually nothing stopping this type of investment now, and what investors want is confidence about if I build the capacity and the capability to do this, is there an upside, basically. They want that sort of supply of investable opportunities. So I'll stop there, but that's the upshot.
Well, I think that's fascinating in that it's perhaps the prevailing narrative is there's all sorts of policy tweaks that are needed, or practical kind of considerations that need to be worked through before these investments can be made. We've certainly heard those excuses from KiwiSavers and at Motion Capital, but and perhaps then handing on to Deion, who, you know, is not necessarily KiwiSaver but broader institutional investor at Morrison's, and Morrison's have really been leading the way in terms of investment into renewables, certainly. Perhaps you can give us a bit more clarity, Deion, on the kind of certainty and clarity that institutional investors want in order to make these kinds of investment decisions.
Yeah, I think that is important. We can say returns don't sort of matter, but they actually do, and people give the money that they hold for other people to places like Morrison on the basis that they'll get something in return for it, and they expect that we're going to do it in the right place, as we heard earlier from Rob. Some of the stuff is hygiene level now, right? You won't put your money into nuclear arms or whatever it is. But so we have high expectations that you can see a path to return, basically. And so for us, we're infrastructure. So it's a bit different. We're infrastructure, and what does that mean? It means anything that you can have visibility on good kind of, I won't say risk-free, but understood risk in terms of the cash flows from whatever you're investing in. And also that it's a long-term asset, not something that will evaporate tomorrow. And so we're facing that problem at the moment, right? The energy transition, I've been in that my entire career. You actually need a bit of thermal generation at the moment. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, and we operate across many parts of the world, you need some thermal. But to put some money into, say, a new gas generator, as an example, right now, in New Zealand you can't find gas, so it's irrelevant, but other parts of the world you can probably see revenue for 10 years, but you probably can't guarantee that after that. And so it's really hard for us to say, here, put some of our money into thermal generation, but we kind of need it to make the transition to fully renewable electricity system. So there's a bit of an impasse there for us, but pretty much we need to know the revenue is secure. We do that if you ever look at what we've done at Manawa Energy, which is one of the companies that Infratil owns for another 5 weeks until Contact owns it. But that company, we invest in Manawa because we need it to look like infrastructure. So Manawa must do the stuff that's involved with customers, right? Because we don't want to talk to mum and dad about paying their $100 every month. Someone needs to be that interface, and we just need to stand back.
Yep. So there's a real proof that you need in order to make these kinds of decisions, and we kind of see it at our role at Motion Capital. We're focused on venture capital, so very early stage investing in technology companies that help the world decarbonise. We hope that Morrison's will support our third fund, perhaps, once we've proven that this is something we can make large amounts of money doing. For fear of getting political, I wanted to next bring up government. A couple of our portfolio companies went down to see Simon Watts a couple of weeks ago, and maybe just as a bit of a preface, he said to them, tell me what you want, but please make sure it's not money. And I think that's a kind of mindset, or perhaps the context that we're in this current government and economic cycle. Perhaps I might hand to the panel and to talk about what might be specific policy shifts or ideas that would stimulate investment in the climate transition.
Cool, I can go first.
That's a good one for you, Mike.
So I don't think this transition, this energy transition that this country has to go through requires a huge amount of taxpayer funding. I think it requires everyone in this room to understand the opportunity that's available, and also then talk to all your peers who are not in this room about the opportunity that is available. But New Zealand has some of the most expensive fossil fuel prices in the world, and comparatively quite cheap electricity. And so that's what we are all about, is trying to figure out how it is that we can swap those fossil fuels out for finance. And to give you just an example, and this is on my farm alone, but it also is very, very similar for the households of New Zealand. I can generate electricity now at about 7 cents a kilowatt hour when I finance it on my farm mortgage. I can buy it from New Zealand's electricity system at about 35 cents a kilowatt hour, and it costs me about $1 a kilowatt hour if I was to take that electricity out of a litre of diesel. So it sort of shows you there is a massive opportunity available at the moment if we can figure out how to swap fuels for finance. And I've been obviously speaking extensively with Minister Watts about how to do this. We've got some ideas on the table about how it is that we can innovate in the finance space to make this happen. But the fundamental thing for the households of New Zealand, which I think need to be treated as part of the infrastructure of New Zealand's energy system moving forward, is that if we can get them to run fully electric machines and generate and store electricity themselves, they will save anywhere between $1,000 and $4,000 a year, which is enough money left on the table to not only pay back your interest and your capital, but also give them a cost of living reduction. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity that we all need to be putting our heads together to figure out how that, all that billions of dollars that are out there that are promised, that is ready to be invested in not only New Zealand, but also in the climate. How is it that we aggregate all of these small customers together into one investable product and get that money allocated out where it needs to go? So there you go.
Fantastic. And Mike and Rewiring are doing a fantastic job in promoting that and getting the message out there to Kiwis. So Deion, Joe, any policy ideas from either of you?
Do you want me to take that one?
Yep.
Yeah, so we have been working with the government over the last 12 months on a New Zealand sustainable finance strategy. So we are looking very forward to seeing how that shakes out. It's under consideration at the moment. But in doing that work, what you quickly come to understand is that we need real economy policy. because the sustainable finance strategy really needs to support the kind of broader set of objectives. So as part of what we've discussed with ministers is an energy strategy. And by that we have been fairly clear that we don't mean like a vision statement, we mean the actual sector transition pathway, because off of the back of that then you can have all the kind of enabling policies that help the finance to flow. So I've quite often heard myself saying in meetings, can somebody please explain to me what we mean by recycle the Crown balance sheet, because people in these kinds of rooms take it for granted. And someone did explain to me in a way that was useful for me to remember, you know, if the government's going to sell assets it doesn't need and buy assets it does need, it should be clear about the outcomes that it wants. And so that's the reason for the energy strategy. It's not to pick winners, it's just to decide what kind of game you're in and you know, set people up to win within that. From there, if you decide that distributed energy is in, then you tilt the system. And so there's a whole lot of sort of settings around partial crown-back guarantees or repo eligibility settings or term lending facilities like the Reserve Bank and Treasury did in COVID. You can mobilise things into that outcome, but if you don't know the outcome in the sector pathway, then it's hard to figure out where everyone needs to play. So that's kind of the pillar of our advocacy and engagement right now.
I think I'd like us to take a bit of a view around the world where things have and have not worked in this encouragement on a path to, say, electrification as an example. You can make 7 cents electricity at home for sure, but you can't at night or perhaps even midday yesterday in Auckland, right? So it's not about the electricity, it's about the storage and then the consumption of it. And the electrification story is not just about making solar panels on everyone's roof, right? It's why do we want to do that? It's because we need to replace fossil fuels. And so that's electrification of what we do with those fossil fuels. That's exactly what we need to be doing. And we used to encourage electric vehicles. Love it or hate it, at least we're doing something. But the other part of it for us at Morrison, it's not just about electricity or energy. It's also about what can we do to perhaps restore the environment a bit. And there is some work happening in New Zealand about how do we regenerate some of the poorer areas of our land mass in New Zealand. We've got quite a bit of it that's underutilised and could be restored back to native bush, for example. And we're involved in that process in Australia. They actually encourage us through carbon credit creation in Australia, not from stinky pine trees, but from actual native bush regeneration. So we're doing a bit of that. So I think you've got to look at the whole ecosystem is my point. And it's not just go and put a solar panel on your roof, because until you know what you're going to do with that energy, I've got solar panels on my roof and pretty much most of it goes to Mercury at 8 cents a unit or whatever they buy it for, right? It's a waste. Yeah. I do need to change suppliers, but again, that's also an apathy thing in New Zealand. As you said, electricity is still quite cheap in New Zealand, and the message that we've heard for decades that renewable energy is cheap is not the right message, because actually it's not. It's the cheapest form of new energy, but it's not cheap, right? And so we've got to get real here in New Zealand that what you're actually doing is offsetting your $3 a litre petrol or whatever, not getting electricity for 8 cents, because that's not what the game is.
Yep.
Yeah, I think just to address that, there's a couple of really good points in there. One, we're probably going to need to double the amount of renewable electricity in New Zealand just to replace all the fossil fuels in our economy. So it's really, really important to understand that while we have an incredibly renewable electricity system, which is something that we should be quite proud of, about 73% of the energy that we use in this country is fossil fuels. Most of that fossil fuels is sourced from overseas, and that is what makes it really, really expensive. To follow up on the point about electricity only being able to be generated during the day, that is true when it comes to solar panels on your rooftop, but we're looking at now at about 23 cents a kilowatt hour to store it in your battery. So even now on my farm, I'm at the point where generating and storing electricity is cheaper than what the New Zealand electricity system can give me with all their scale. The reason for this is really simple. Half of your electricity bill that you get at home is the generation, the other half is the poles and wires that deliver it to your home. right? So even if the wholesale rate of electricity went to zero in New Zealand and everyone just gave away their power, it still would not get to the residents cheaper than their own rooftop solar now. So that's why I'm very, I don't like the idea of necessarily picking winners either, but I think this is at the point now where it's so obvious that we have to figure out how to do this at scale where it's applicable across New Zealand in order to build out the cheapest energy system. The wero that I would lay down has never ever been cheaper to generate and store electricity than today. So why do our electricity bills keep going up? And it's because we're relying on an energy sector to change an energy system that they don't necessarily have the incentives to change. Sorry, rambling on.
Maybe.
But I think I agree with you in general that we can do better, right? New Zealand has relied on this thing called Huntly for its backup, right? And so we need to find a way to do something about it. It could be community batteries, it could be whatever it is. But our transmission system, half our bill, transmission system is being invested in permanent rate increases on investments that aren't built for what we can do now. If I've got a battery at home, I don't care if the transmission tips over for a night, right? But we're paying to have N-1 contingency, and we're paying forever for that, right? So we just got to change our paradigm around the whole system.
Now, we've got a number of questions already come through, and if you vote on your favourite question, it will get to the top for me, so I'm not sure we'll get time to answer all 12 questions that have come through so far, so maybe just dealing with the most top voted. What is the biggest obstacle to shifting investment controllers' mindset towards positive investment and transition instead of a wait-and-see approach?
I'm not sure there's a wait-and-see approach. The way we're looking at the world is the things that matter. So it's about decarbonisation is important. So we're already there. We have supportive funds from around the world that I think there's enough money waiting, ready, and will invest in this space. I'm not sure it needs a lot of mindset change. What we do like is certainty, and so you can't turn up in government cycles with uncertainty refreshing every 3 or 4 years, right? So we need a bit of policy certainty, maybe.
And I think just generally shining a light on the opportunity, like markets aren't perfect. If there is an opportunity, particularly in a place like New Zealand where finance is hugely inefficient, it doesn't necessarily flow through to immediately to opportunity, so we need to shout it from the rooftops. Next question is, given governments have been cutting some climate programs, does this increase climate risk for institutional investors? If so, what should they do about it?
I'll do this one again. I was at an event in London 2 weeks ago, and those people there have already admitted that 2.5 degrees is now a possible. We might get to 2.5, not 1.5, right? And there was a few drawers dropped open from this part of the world when that was admitted, right? So it sort of feels like a lot of the world is already going, hey, we haven't made it. Is that because of governments? I'm not sure. I think it's because everyone still kind of is a bit blasé about climate. We just aren't feeling it enough yet.
Joe, Mike, anything on that?
I'm not an institutional investor, so my opinion, take it with a grain of salt, I guess. But I think it's really important that we look at the fundamentals of climate change, which is about 80% of emissions globally come from fossil fuel, either extraction or combustion. And so therefore it seems very obvious to me that climate action moving forward is the reduction of fossil fuels. And how we go about doing that in New Zealand is going to be different from every other country in the world. We talk about certainty. New Zealanders leave about $29 million a day on the table by not electrifying their homes, right? So if there's anything that we can do, it is figuring out how to accelerate this, because quite frankly, we are probably in the best economic position in the world because of that spread in cost between fossil fuels and the ability to generate electricity ourselves. We're probably the first country in the world that really has hit that tipping point where you're never better off in New Zealand buying a fossil fuel machine again. economically. So therefore, why are we still buying fossil fuel machines? Well, I think the answer is that we haven't communicated in New Zealand nearly hard enough that the future is not in fossil fuels, and what is the energy economics. And the energy economics says you're going to save a lot of money by making the right choice. And us in the finance industry have to figure out how to make sure that everybody knows what the right choice is and then is able to make the right choice. And I think that's the wicked problem that exists in New Zealand. I know I haven't really answered your question at all, and I apologise for that. But as I said, I'm not an institutional investor.
Obviously not an institutional investor, but I do think we have to be careful that we ask financial institutions to hurry up and understand their exposure to different types of risk, including climate, and then not use that information a year later in relation to business decisions about their exposure to said climate risk. So I just think the flip-flopping with policy and sentiment around how financial institutions should use the information that they have related to, different risks is, I think, problematic, because it just leaves everybody really uncertain about when to lead, when to step back, what kind of operating environment is. So I just think we have to temper some of those sort of tendencies to in that direction.
Joe, while you have the mic, there's a question specifically for you.
Oh, good.
How has the Centre for Sustainable Finance examined Australia's super scheme for any lessons on investing in private capital for the transition?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this in the working group that we had, and I guess one of the things that came through from the many discussions we had with investors is that in Australia there seems to be a bit more of a sort of a social compact between investors and the government, a sort of an if you build it, we will come type of maturity to their schemes. And so that is, I guess, about government and providers of capital sort of working together to think through how they're going to meet national level objectives. So I think that's probably the main thing that has come up in relation to what could we do better or more in New Zealand. Also, they're just a bit more mature generally, and there's generally a higher allocation. I think it's between 15 and 20% allocation to private assets, whereas in New Zealand it's less than 3%. But those two things are connected, is what we hear. Yeah.
And that's another thing in New Zealand. We don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. If something's working in Australia, let's replicate it here. If something's working in one sector of impact, let's replicate it in another. And certainly that's massive opportunities just to copy what's working.
Can I just challenge that a little bit though? Because when we have the Rewiring America team or the Rewiring Australia team come over and see what we're doing in New Zealand, the impact that we are able to have here is remarkable, and they call it like small country agility. And so why I think there is an opportunity to always look abroad to see what other people are doing very well, why don't we try and do something really well first? Be pretty cool.
I think they maybe, I don't know, this is probably your area more than mine, but I think they maybe have slightly less aversion to the idea of public and private sort of collaboration and ownership in those types of assets. So Sydney Airport is one that keeps coming up as an example. So I think there's just a kind of a maturation of the whole maybe conversation in New Zealand, I think, and specifically in the work that we did, we really had to keep focused on what's in the interests of New Zealanders, of KiwiSaver members, which is that exposure over a longer term to different types of assets, right? The opportunity to have higher returns as a result of that, but that to some degree we have to remove the burden of the KiwiSaver members on really understanding that at high resolution and I guess normalise it, or safeguard it,
We can learn a lot from the Aussie super system. The reason they've had to allow sort of private investments, if you like, is because there's so much money. They can't find a home for it all, so they've got to think a bit outside the square, right? We're not quite at that point. There's so much money we have to do that, but we should. because we're missing a trick. Yeah.
Hopefully in 10 years, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, for you personally. Yeah.
Probably got time for maybe one or two more questions. And there's quite a few here in the chat, so we won't get to all of them. But this is kind of related to a point you were touching on earlier, Joe. How do we make those long-term views about climate change risk become short-term risks that investors will take seriously?
Oh, yeah, I was waiting for an opportunity to say this word. Insurance, that's the word. Like, it is a short-term risk. It's here right now. So I think we need to kind of connect the adaptation and resilience and mitigation conversation and really think about what the actual immediate risks are to us now. And that will help to, I guess, crystallize the longer-term pathways, impetus for change, yeah. Also, I think maybe it's just about being maybe younger, I don't know, more energetic or enthusiasm for it. Like, it's still, like, we've been saying this for 5, 6, 10 years now, like, get some young people up amongst it. Like, even though governments come and go and sentiment comes and go, still important, I think, still important.
Last question. I hear that New Zealand's small scale of projects is a barrier to investing. What could be done to attract impact investment into public projects in the $10 million to $100 million range? Maybe Deion?
Yeah, scale certainly is a thing. The old, do I get out of bed for this is an issue, but you've just got to find a way. And so Morrison, $44 billion we look after, we can't find a single investment for that. So we do have different funds, different approaches, different teams, all working on many. And the smallest thing I've been involved with at Morrison was 50 million, right? So there is a way to get smaller pockets of capital applied at the right place already. I'm not sure that's a big barrier, I think.
But to Mike's point, there's also a benefit to being small. It's we can still have a massive impact, and certainly one of our philosophies at Motion Capital is New Zealand's a great place to test some of these things and prove it out at a small scale. At a small amount of money, and then we can export that approach, that product, that system to the world. So, certainly the institutional investors have a minimum capital hurdle, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a limitation for New Zealand.
Shouldn't be. I think New Zealand still has this view of climate that we're just small, we're way down here, what can we actually do? But you look at the countries you think are doing well, like Norway, it's also small and it's way up there, right? But Norway's transitioning awesomely from a big oil major to not, right? And we can actually make a difference. We've always boxed above our weight. I hate to say we can learn from the Aussies because we really can't, but maybe we can, right? But let's lead the charge, right? We are keen and young and happy and energetic, right? So why not? But test stuff here, fail fast and move on.
There's 2 million households in New Zealand that probably need an average of $30,000 to $40,000 worth of capital upgrades. That's a lot of mortgages that you guys can top up for those the banks that are in the room, which is obviously very good for the business model. And I'm just wondering about how it is that we just go back to thinking about what defines infrastructure. We're always biased towards our very, very big projects, but I think there's a real opportunity to look at aggregating a whole bunch of small things together, and I think that's going to have the big impact on New Zealand. And what, $30,000 times 2 million, is that within the ballpark for you guys?
Sounds like a lot of money.
Yeah.
Get a return.
Make that happen.
1% return is not enough though. We have to talk about that.
Mike, I've just seen a question come through that I know you want to answer. Mike, how do you see the role of the existing Big Four gentailers in supporting your vision of distributed generation?
Yeah, so this is... I'll answer this pretty quickly at the moment by saying in the last couple of months I have seen a major shift in gentailers talking about distributed energy and the electrification of households, and I think it's because we're starting to all realise we need twice as much electricity. That's a huge increase in the size of the pie, that it's not really one is competing against the other. I actually think that the finance sector will end up being the gentailer's biggest competitor once we figure out how to distribute that money through to households and farms and businesses of New Zealand. But I also think, when we're talking about finance, why is it in New Zealand that we cannot finance solar and batteries and electrification of machines on the power bill? It just makes 100% sense. So you pay your power bill off every month, you will save more money financing this upgrade than you will on what you're currently spending on energy. So why is it that we don't put it through the power bill? And thankfully, we're now in a position where some of these gentailers are actually starting to, I think, pay attention to that being a really big possibility. And if you can use a gentailer to aggregate the households and give them all the capital that you guys want to lend, then that's a great opportunity. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll see something towards the end of the year.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. We're being waved off stage, but thanks very much to my panel for such an insightful discussion. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I'd encourage you to hunt the panel down over a drink later tonight.
Thank you. Can I also just say congratulations to Barry for doing this again? Really good, Barry.
Very good.
Cool, thank you. Thank you very much to the panel. Give them a big round of applause. So I heard we're keen and young and happy and we're going to fail fast, right? Good. So meantime, we're just going to set up for the other panel on nature. Take a couple of minutes to say hello to the people in your table and a little bit of a chat. If you need to go to the loo, do that. We'll start in 2 minutes' time, so have a little chat in the meantime.
You're going to kick us off?
Okay, everybody, can we come back together again? Great, thank you all very much. So we're going to have this panel, and then we will have roundtables for you to continue these discussions. And so plenty of time to talk and work out what you think of the panels and bring your own ideas and experience into the room. But First, we have our panel on nature. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to my wonderful co-CEO, Kate Vennell. Thank you, Kate.
Okay. E na mana, e na waka, e na reo, e ro rangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Kate, tako ingoa. Greetings, I'm Kate Vennell, co-CEO of Mindful Money. I have a lot of fun working with Barry. It's been a real blast. It's been about a year now. This panel is going to cover our economic dependency on nature, the opportunity for long-term resilience, and practical initiatives to accelerate funding. We know that nature is in serious trouble, but we also know how dependent we are on it. It regulates our climate, it gives us pure water, it pollinates our crops, she makes us resilient to disasters, and she has the potential to sequester carbon. It comes within the context of research, as Barry mentioned, that Mindful Money is doing on oceans, coincidentally, along with David Attenborough's wonderful film. At the end of June, we will be adding some major users and producers of plastics to our companies of concern, along with some global fishing and some other themes like deep sea mining. As with the other panel, please put your questions into Slido. And without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome our three experts on both nature harm and nature tools. Dr. Kayla Kingdon-Bebb is CEO of World Wildlife Fund in New Zealand, previously served as Director of Policy at Aotearoa, New Zealand's Department of Conservation. Kayla is an environmental policy expert and also has a background in treaty law. Last year in October, WWF and EY published Nature Positive Aotearoa, which covered the economic costs and opportunities of halting nature loss in New Zealand. Nathalie Whitaker is a system designer working at the intersection of digital innovation, impact finance, and grassroots regeneration. She co-founded givealittle.co, Aotearoa, New Zealand's largest crowdfunding platform. She is now co-funder of the Toha Foundry, a network, a digital public infrastructure project. Nathalie is committed to simplifying and accelerating investment for environmental impact. Andrew Grant is a polymath, an engineer by training with a bent for systems thinking and economics, gained as a senior partner at McKinsey in its global practice. He is now driving strategic philanthropy and nature regeneration projects through various roles: CEO of Next Foundation, trustee for Pure Advantage, Recloaking Papa Tuanuku, and trustee of Koitu, Centre for Informed Futures. Please give a huge round of applause to our expert panelists. Kayla, I thought it'd be good to start with you, given your report, Nature Positive. Could you please outline some of the key findings from this and just give us a sense of where we are in Aotearoa?
Certainly. Tēnā koutou katoa, he mihi nui, he mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa. Thanks for the introduction, Kate. So I've always felt like nature loss is sort of like the poor cousin to climate change. But, inherently these two things are related, right? And for those of you who follow the World Economic Forum, over the last few risk assessments, which they do every year, I understand, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse has emerged as a top 4 risk over the next decade. And through that assessment, we also understand that more than 50% of global GDP is either moderately or highly dependent on nature. So I started engaging with this sort of reporting, and it occurred to me that in Aotearoa, because we're so heavily dependent on nature in terms of our primary industries, in terms of tourism, in terms of our wider well-being, I reckon we're more highly risk exposed than the global average. And that was sort of the impetus for the Nature Positive Aotearoa report that we did. For those of you familiar with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or perhaps you're not, it's an instrument that lists a number of targets and goals, biodiversity goals, under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. It's negotiated every 10 years. The last one was issued in 2022, 2 years late, thanks to COVID. A few of those targets in particular are really resonant for Aotearoa. And so with this report, we partnered with EY, and we did a first in-country economic analysis, a whole of economy model to assess the risks or benefits to Aotearoa of investing heavily in meeting a few of those targets. And numbers were really startling, actually. $270 billion over the next 50 years could be gained in New Zealand by investing in actions to halt and reverse nature loss across a few key metrics. And we had a particular focus on industries. So primary industries, horticulture, deep sea fisheries, wild-caught fisheries, aquaculture, tourism, etc. And the case for our industries is interesting as well, because it actually suggests that while investment is required and transformation is required, the upside, even for primary industries alone by 2080, I think was $7.7 billion. This says to me the case is pretty clear. By a number of conservative estimates, globally and domestically, the case for investing to halt and reverse nature loss is apparent. And yet we're not doing it.
Yeah, that's a really provocative set of stats then. And you're right, we do feel like it's the poor cousin climate. In terms of the money going into nature regeneration, it's overwhelmingly public, a little bit of philanthropy, a little bit of just hard yards mahi. Andrew, give us a sense of where the state of global nature markets are. We feel like we're a little bit behind in Aotearoa, but yeah, if you could just give us an overview of so-called nature capital markets.
Well, I think they are really starting to form in quite positive ways. A lot of it is to do with the sort of work that Kayla has referred to. But I think there are three really significant things that have occurred quite recently. One is, to Kayla's point, we're now recognising that actually climate and nature, they're absolutely joined together. And in many respects, the best thing we can do, as much as I love Mike and everything is that they were saying around rewiring Aotearoa, but actually preserving intact nature trumps everything in terms of what we can do from a climate perspective, in terms of what's accessible now. So I think that's the one, the way those markets are coming. The second is, I think we've got very clear parameters around what these markets would look like. I think people didn't know whether they're going to be biodiversity credits or markets for the preservation of intact nature or markets for nature repair. I think we understand those swim lanes now, and they're really taking hold.
So what does that mean? Is it carbon plus, or what does it mean?
Exactly, and I think there are three things. It's carbon plus, so it's absolutely carbon with added benefits, or high quality, high integrity carbon credits. There's no doubt that market is for real. The preservation of intact nature, those markets are for real. Likewise, markets for the restoration of nature, a la what is occurring in Australia, are for real. I think the idea that there are going to be independent biodiversity credits by themselves is not developing. Right. And I know, and there's been some discussion in New Zealand around those. I do think we should look at it. They're just too hard. The contextual nature, the measurement challenges, it's too hard to do in isolation. So I think that's the second. We've got real clarity around where the money is going and where the markets are going to emerge. And the third thing I would say, there's also real standards emerging around what counterparties expect. What they are looking for in terms of measurement, in terms of scale, and I would say on that side of things, the opportunity in New Zealand, we have the opportunity to create and present projects that are truly world scale, are an Amazonian scale in their quality, integrity, and what they could do.
And before I move on to Nathalie, who may have some perspectives on the biodiversity point, but who are the potential purchasers of these whatever we'll call them, units, and what's the sort of business case for them? Because that's, I think, been a little harder to see.
Well, I think, look, the market is diverse. So the scale that we're, as the Next Foundation, are trying to participate in is more at the really doing landscape scale projects, and they're the global counterparties are the Microsofts, the Googles, the Amazons that really are in the market for millions and millions of tonnes of these things. And in many respects, they end up being bilateral arrangements. They're not things that are through liquid functioning markets. I do think the wonderful work that Nathalie and others are doing, I think there's a different reality at the smaller scale of the market as well. But certainly at the larger scale, it is those players, and that's largely carbon at the moment. But I would also say that governments are participating you look at the Australian market, in the market for nature repair, that is a real market that's being stood up. And when you do look at many of the global players like Rio Tinto and others, they are actively participating in the market for the preservation of intact nature as well. So they're not as mature, they're not as deep, they're not as prevalent as we would like, but they are there and they are starting to emerge.
Okay, that's positive. Nathalie, I'd like to go to the sort of other side of it. We do in New Zealand, I think, benefit from the huge mahi done by private landowners, iwi owners, and many others, often for not any reward except the intrinsic value of it. Can you share how Toha is trying to accelerate that and sort of really support those actors?
Sure. Is that working? No, it is working now. We're the team that built Give a Little, and that journey was, roughly 8 years of really kind of intimate understanding of New Zealand at the small scale. So all of the households and communities and how they come together and work together to overcome hard challenges when they confront them. And I think one of the privileges of that was seeing all of the data about all of the things that are going wrong at any given time, and then seeing how generous we are to each other, but also where that generosity kind of falls a little bit short in the environmental space. And so coming off the Give a Little journey, we knew that there was something that we hadn't cracked in terms of understanding peer-to-peer giving or generosity and what the next step needed to be. So one of the first projects that we jumped on board with was Trees That Count, and helped Sir Stephen Tyndall and Project Crimson understand what the opportunity for a nature or native tree marketplace looked like. And I was pretty sceptical going into that. I'd sort of seen how much New Zealanders cared about humans, and then I was a little bit sceptical about how much we were going to care about trees. But I think it was that journey of really trying to understand where the scale, finance and funding could come from to really meet Sir Stephen's ambition, that it became really clear that we were needing to understand more about our carbon markets. And so I guess it was a deep dive into all of the eggs that we've put into the ETS market in terms of addressing our climate issues, and the kind of failure of that market now in terms of the land use transition that's underway and what that means for nature. And so the process with Toha just really started from there, understanding that we had a really kind of big systemic issue around the infrastructure that we're relying on to drive environmental markets, that we simply don't have the data to deal with the complexity of nature, and that nature shows up at small scale, just like New Zealand shows up at small scale. And so the way that we're going to have to solve this data infrastructure challenge was going to have to be as nuanced as all of the sort of micro challenges that we saw with Give a Little. I guess picking up on the point around carbon markets and the scale versus the opportunity around biodiversity credits, the only thing I'd say before that is we really have to start thinking differently about valuing time. So time is the kind of big resource that we have kind of come to rely on when it comes to conservation and protecting our natural ecosystems. And that's been all good and well until it's an emergency, and it is most definitely an emergency now. So shifting our mindset around, attributing value to time is a huge opportunity for New Zealand, because it speaks directly to something that we love to do, which is to be connected to nature. And it's also a massive opportunity for our primary industries, but we have to kind of get over this mindset of seeing environmental stewardship as a free thing that we all ride on, and we must really start to value that work. When it comes to carbon and biodiversity, I think biodiversity credits, I agree with Andrew, they are a little bit of a misleading opportunity for the market, and I think part of that is because we've got so used to understanding environmental value as carbon credits, a unit of value that's a single greenhouse gas, kind of one tonne. We're just simply not going to get that level of fungibility and simplicity in the unit for biodiversity credits, and so we need to think more holistically and systemically about the way that we're going to support an abundance of financial instruments, and for that, the conditions for that to happen under high trust. That's not easy, because it relies on active disclosures from small scale back up to capital markets, so those conditions of trust are really, really important. But just to pick up on the last panel, that's one opportunity that New Zealand really does have. Small scale means speed to trust, And if we can demonstrate a system for nature financing from New Zealand, I think we'll be onto a winner.
Yeah, I think we'll probably come back to the point of data. I'd like to turn to another question, which is, we seem to be locked in this short-termist. Who's seen the ocean? Who has actually seen ocean? Yeah, actually, go see it. It's really powerful. If you don't have time to go see the whole film, at least watch the trailer about bottom trawling. Kayla, what is it that is stopping us getting out of the short-term mindsets? We know fishing in this way, like bottom trawling, is not sustainable. It's not a long-term way to fish. How do we help communities think about different economic opportunities and the long-term sustainability, and particularly in primary industries? Is there any experience that WWF has?
Yes, two things. One, for anyone who has not yet seen Ocean, we're going to be hosting a free screening of it at the Maritime Museum in Auckland on the 27th of June. So please join us. Diary. And I'll be there after the UN Oceans Conference, which is taking place next week, so we'll be doing a bit of a report back on how that went. In terms of the shift away from short-termism, I'm going to draw on my experience working in public policy for a second. I think it's really, anytime an entity is taking a decision, an investment decision, whether you're the government of New Zealand or you're sitting around a boardroom table, you consider a range of factors in sort of a cost-benefit analysis, right? We have a fundamental problem in this country insofar as we are not valuing our natural capital adequately. And I have seen ministers sit around a table talking about an investment opportunity, completely neglecting either the undermining effect it will have on our natural environment and its integrity, or conversely missing the opportunity, the positive benefit that that type of action or investment could yield. And until we crack that, because the signals that governments send are important for the market and they're important for investors, until we crack that, we are going to be stuck in a cycle of short-termism.
Yeah, what do you...
Can I just, I plus one, multiple times on this one. And look, you're all astute financial people. You know, when you look at any company, that stewardship is around looking at the income statement and the balance sheet. And you spend equal time thinking about those. The challenge we have today is we only think about the income statement, we're not looking at the balance sheet. And the work that Kayla did with EY, I think, was extraordinary in this dimension, but there have been other efforts. I had the privilege of sitting on Jacinda's Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council, and our current Prime Minister and I did some work to actually value what is New Zealand's natural capital worth from a balance sheet perspective. And we used at the time the most current methodologies. We came up with a number of $5 trillion in terms of the value of our natural capital. The interesting thing of that number, if you divide it by our population, the largest endowment every New Zealander has is not their house. It's actually $1 million of natural capital of endowment. And why couldn't we get into a mindset of we're all born with $1 million of natural capital? Today we live extractive lives. We give less than $1 million to our kids. Couldn't we get into a world where we're born with $1 million and we give more than $1 million to our kids? And I think, to Kayla's, until we get into that mindset, if we've got this extraordinarily valuable asset, that's what we need to protect, that's what we need to look after and steward. And I think fundamentally that is the way that, when you're only looking at the income statement, that by definition draws you into an annual budget. The balance sheet gives you that stewardship of what you're actually harnessing and looking after over time. The other little insight, by the way, when that work was done, 60% of our natural capital is actually our oceans, which was surprising to many of us.
Yeah. So picking up that point, is it natural capital accounting we need? Is it mandatory nature disclosure? We've seen the benefits, early benefits, and still a lot more to come, hopefully, of CRD in terms of showing the risks and so on. Does anyone have a view on that? Is it all about accounting? I'm an accountant, so I'll just disclose that.
Sorry, you'll need to shut me up in terms of it. But look, the one thing I'd say, the other thing around business is, when the accounting doesn't reflect the reality, you've got a problem. And I do think at the moment we have this problem with, so if you look at lock-up carbon with radiata, it's only because that's only enabled because the accounting is fundamentally screwed up. Yep. If you actually did proper, real risks, real externalities, the biological, there is in no world would that ever stack up with the true economics. It's only that we've let the accounting get distorted from their reality. And I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to make sure that we just don't end up having this sort of false fight of accounting that doesn't match the reality to try and I think that's the beauty. We've now got the measurement techniques, we've now actually got the ability to interrogate what is actually happening, rather than to create some sort of accounting, poor approximation of the reality that's occurring.
This might be a great point to bring you back into the equation, Nathalie. In terms of the value of time, as you say, we're not recording it as well. We're not recording it at all, really. How would Toha help solve that? And you mentioned data sovereignty to me. What's the real critical importance of that, and how does data really help us move forward?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to state the obvious. Just like in all financial markets, we can't bring nature to the market. We have to bring a representation of nature. So we need data about what's going on in the natural world in order to understand what we're investing in and what we could be investing in, and the risk of the nature risk that is present in our investments. And the big challenge that we have around incentive alignment is if we want people to get out there and deal at the small scale with all the small scale decisions that they can make and actions that they can take that will benefit nature, we really need to ask them to share information about those actions and those decisions and the risk that they're holding in their small businesses, on their land, or within their organisations. If we're not going to ensure sovereignty with data, which is the idea of people owning, governing, and benefiting from the data about them and about their actions, then we run the risk of essentially repeating the same extractive patterns that have got us into this problem in the first place, which means we can create financial instruments which are disconnected from the incentives driving the actual behaviours in communities or on the ground. So if we wire financial instruments through data infrastructure that ensures data sovereignty, then we have a much greater chance of making sure that these instruments are going to be enduring for the future and kind of get beyond this reductive way of needing to deal with the accounting because we simply don't have enough information. So that's, I guess, the data sovereignty piece in a nutshell.
Yeah, and are you partly saying if a job's worth doing, it's not necessary to do it perfectly?
No, I think it's important that we, start by being able to attribute people with their efforts and their decisions and connect them to the downstream benefits, financial, from the outcomes of those actions. And I think that data sovereignty piece is really critical to get right at the first mile.
And can I just understand, if we did have this putative market where you're collecting the packet of the owner of the land and the work and the benefit, can that still then be traded? Can you keep the connections throughout a series? Yeah.
Absolutely. It does rely on new technology and the sort of technology that we don't like to talk too much about. Digital assets are very helpful in accelerating these types of approaches. It brings a certain level of transparency and trust inherent in the tech, but also lower costs in terms of verification of
Are we kind of
actions.
Talking NFTs here or something like that?
Yeah, we're talking a bunch of different types of digital assets, but it's possible to create, on the right infrastructure, whole ecosystems that can incentivize the right behaviours and start to change the levels of comfort and trust in sharing information across different actors, which means we can kind of transition from thinking about the large-scale projects down to the micro and getting it right at small scale.
Okay. I'd like to bring you back into the conversation, Kayla. What looks like a great real-world project in terms of whether in New Zealand or in global, in your experience, of what helps to bring communities on the journey? Because we seem to be in a fight sometimes against communities. How do we make that better?
Well, my experience of conservation work and challenges in halting and reversing biodiversity loss is that fundamentally these are problems that are human problems. They generally have a question of human livelihoods and well-being at their heart. Whether you're talking about the poaching of tigers, or you're talking about loss of intact habitats, or you're talking about overfishing, fundamentally it's almost an economic problem at its heart. It's very, very rarely about pure ecology. And the best projects, the most impactful projects that I've seen at WWF are projects that confront that fundamental question head on. Because if you're not dealing with the drivers, which is about wealth and livelihood and people's ability to feed their children, you're just dealing with the surface level symptoms. And I guess an example I'd share is a project that we've been running in the Philippines for about 15 years, which is shortly about to be replicated in Kenya and different parts of Africa, which is about the sustainability of local tuna stocks, bluefin tuna. And the circumstance in this community was that these juvenile tuna were being really over-harvested by the local community. They were using set nets and quite unsustainable methodologies. And because they had insecure access to electricity and no refrigeration capability, they were losing like 30% of their catch, resulting in overfishing and depressed incomes. So our project with them in that community was one of solar electricity, refrigeration technology. We enabled them to adopt long-line, single-hand sustainability methodologies, and it supported them to get Marine Stewardship Council certification, which opened up whole new markets for them, which effectively meant that these small-scale artisanal fishers, instead of going out and set netting or net catching a whole host of juvenile tuna, could go out for one afternoon, long line, a really big tuna, sell it, process it correctly, freeze it, etc., and export it to markets in Japan for like 8 times the price. It had massive flow-on effects with the community, and over the last 15 years, it's evolved into financial literacy work with the community and working with women's collectives to do value-added processing on these tuna. And if you were an outsider and you walked up to the project and said, is this really WWF doing this project? Because it's so much become about the community's livelihoods and not just about the fish. But it's been hugely transformational for these communities in the Philippines, like hugely. Much better environmental outcomes, the fisheries in much better health, the communities have had all sorts of development on a whole bunch of different metrics. And that's the kind of approach we need to be taking to a host of conservation problems, I think.
That sounds really inspiring. And Nathalie, I know Tauhara's got 2 great pilot projects underway. Again, we demonise farmers, but what's your real world experience of people who own land and those pilots?
Desperate to be recognised for doing the right thing and wanting nature to play a bigger role in their business. Wanting to be recognised for the nature and ecosystem services that their farm delivers for the benefit of all, and a real transition with some dignity and respect for the really difficult work.
And what are the barriers that they've experienced before you came along, and where do they see the opportunities? I mean, yes, there's an intrinsic, and somebody's asked a great question, isn't it just about intrinsic? But for those pilots, where do they see the opportunities?
I think communities are looking to be recognised for their value. They're looking, particularly I think being based on the East Coast for our R&D phase in Tauhara has been a real privilege. We started out with a reasonably theoretical view of regenerative economics and engaging with the community on that basis, and then to be hit by a cyclone a couple of years ago and sort of see large-scale devastation across every primary industry that New Zealand relies upon. And just some fundamental undermining of the basis for capital investment in a whole region that is heavily reliant on ETS revenues as well. You kind of go, okay, there's a whole bunch of resource that is now going to be needed to be mobilised to find resilience for a whole bunch of businesses and industries in that region. And I think when we engage with the community, they're looking for their time and their coordination to be valued. They're wanting their banks and insurers to recognise the value of the proactive actions that they're taking on their land to de-risk their own transition, to bring stability to catchments, to ensure that bridges and don't wash out at the next weather event, and to be kind of, I guess, attributed with some of that future liability today, and that shouldn't be that hard to do in a small country like New Zealand. It relies on people getting around the table, doing some proper risk assessment, and really forecasting that liability, and then working out that it's much, much cheaper to start incentivising the right practices today than it is to deal with repeated events into the future. So I think there's a real sense that something's not quite right, and just a couple of basis points off the mortgage is not enough in terms of an incentive to be making really hard decisions about the future.
And so would you see there to be an opportunity for banks and insurers maybe to front load some more of the benefit?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's not just about financial markets, it's about all players.
All players, local governments, central government, philanthropy where appropriate.
Yeah.
But communities can take risk and do take risk on their own. And I think if we come back to this idea of valuing time, we get it right from the grassroots.
Is there something you want to add to that, Andrew?
No, and again, I think it's extraordinary what's being done. The other thing I just say from a New Zealand perspective, I also think we have the opportunity to curate some truly at-scale projects that are globally significant.
Yeah.
And I just, one of the ones that, as the Next Foundation, we're trying to promote, Fiordland is in the same zip code as the Amazon around what it sequesters in carbon. Yet we're trashing the place. In fact, worse than that, we're letting Australians trash the place with possums. And they eat 3 to 4% of the biomass every year. If we were to remove that permanently, that's multiples of closing Huntley, as an example. And so I also think, for me, it's like all of these things. Climate change and preserving nature is so existential. We need all of these things at once. But we do actually have some taonga assets at scale that I just get a little frustrated that we don't realise what we have. And also that they're not static, they are going backwards quickly. So we really do need to act. But if we act now, it's a bit like, so I don't want to give people a punchline, but the wonderful thing about the Attenborough Oceans movie is it's so hopeful about if you do give the oceans an even chance, they respond extraordinarily. New Zealand forests are the same. You give them an even break, they respond, but we don't have that many years left to give them an even break.
Yeah, and so you're on the ground at the moment doing work, predator control?
We have in South Westland, we now have 120,000 hectares. The other thing you need to do is you need to get it predator-free to hard physical boundaries where the predators can't reinvade.
Yeah.
And predators can't exist above 1,500 metres. They can't swim the big, cold, deep, fast-flowing rivers, and they can't deal with the sea. So we need to do it to those boundaries to make it permanent.
Yeah.
And then you can actually crystallise a credit and a biodiversity option potentially on top of that. But we actually have some incredible assets to steward that are literally, they're measured in the billions of dollars of what they're actually, kind of worth if we steward them accordingly.
Yeah, and we kind of are leaders globally in predator. I think we've been commissioned recently to help this South African government clear an island. Are we missing opportunities to get actual revenue from these businesses? Any other ideas around any other businesses, nature-based businesses, that anyone wants to posit?
I just want to echo your point, Kate. I think it's often undersung that New Zealand actually has amazing capability in predator eradication. And whether we lead the world on offshore island eradications, whether it's the big islands, whether it's the Antipodes or what have you, and pretty much any big scale eradication project you go to globally, you'll have a Kiwi helicopter pilot, you'll have Kiwis running the conservation eradication plan. It's incredible. I was actually in the Orkney Isles a couple of years ago, and I was at a nature preserve where they were doing a stoat eradication, and it was just completely full of Dock 200 traps. We're everywhere. And it is something that we have a special gift to give the world. I also just want to talk about risk for a second, because I know a lot of people in this room spend a lot of time thinking about risk. Our report shows that there's potentially great economic benefit to New Zealand in dealing to the current present-day issue of halting anniversary or nature loss and not letting it get any worse. And in terms of shifting it to a long-term mindset, it's about what the decision-making is around the cabinet, it's about natural capital accounting, it's about TNFD. But if you're sitting in a boardroom and you're in charge of a company, leading a company that is not thinking about your dependency on nature, then you are not doing your job. And I'm not just talking about, the potential impairment of marketing position on the basis of New Zealand's clean green brand becoming eroded, which is factually happening as we speak right now. But, businesses have real dependencies on nature. We need healthy soils, we need fresh water, we need a moderate climate for a lot of the businesses that we run in New Zealand. And if you're not actively thinking about that, even to a short-term time scale, because we've seen with Cyclone Gabrielle that, you know, big climate events are devastating and they're happening more and more all the time, you need to be thinking about your dependencies on nature. And it's an opportunity and it's also a risk.
Yeah, maybe I'd like to bring in an audience question here. Actors for good appear to be minnows in comparison to destructive leviathans on the other side. Where do we start to push those major levers for change? And I think we are seeing it a bit in New Zealand, aren't we? Multinational companies coming in, wanting to dig stuff up. Yeah.
Well, look, the one thing I would say, and look, to declare, I've been heavily involved with Fonterra over the years. I also do think folk like Fonterra are actually leaning into when I sit around those boardroom conversations, they are spending capital like very few are in leaning into it. Now, it's not to say the problems aren't real and acute, so I don't think we should demonise some of those people that are actually they're very real issues, and they're keeping the economy going at the same time. So I think we need to, not everyone's created equal either.
Okay, let's take Fonterra then. What is it that's been the lever of change within Fonterra from your experience?
Customers.
Customers
and farmers, to the point your average Kiwi farmer actually believes in nature. And look, whatever you say about a Fonterra farmer is true. The best environmentalists are Fonterra farmers, the worst environmentalists are Fonterra farmers, and everything in between. They are a representation of New Zealand society, but I do think they are, customers are, but also the conversations they have around their dinner table with their kids and the like. And I also think just the commitments they've made now, when you actually look at what's being spent, is pretty real. Where I also think I wouldn't underestimate the ability of just New Zealanders to lean in. And I do wonder whether even reframing our idea, I think it's the inalienable right of every Kiwi to wake up to birdsong. I think the Dawn Chorus is one of those inalienable rights that we should actually fight for. And my own view is there's also that side of the equation, that I think the ability to actually again, what Nathalie and Kayla are doing, I think, around getting the grassroots to rise up, I think is extraordinary. And the other thing, I, in fairness to a lot of private enterprise, I have more faith in the way private enterprise is going to hang in there with their commitments than governments at the moment. So I do think that, well, when you do look at what governments are doing, it is confronting the way governments are pulling back from. I do think it's the role of private enterprise to step up a bit more, because at one level it is utterly in their self-interest to do so. And the discussions, look, again, I left McKinsey 6 months ago, but the conversations I was having with many of the boardroom tables is that they are leaning into these and are going to honour their commitments more than what you're seeing politically. So I think it's dangerous to all of a sudden the private sector is one broad brush. I think there are some very, very good actors that we've got to support and back and lean and call out the bad actors.
And maybe again another audience question, PF Predator Free 2050 and Jobs for Nature. We know that program's ending in June. It's, I think, had about 1.2 billion in that program. When a major player steps away and the obligation falls to smaller players, what collaboration? How do we keep the momentum?
Oh boy. Well, I want to hear your opinion on this too, but I just spent literally half an hour talking to Radio New Zealand about this exact situation. And I guess what I will say is over the last 2 budget cycles, the Department of Conservation has taken about a $300 million cut. Some of that's in explicit cuts that have been made, some of that's in cost pressures that are going to have to be absorbed over the next 4 years. Some of that is the disestablishment of Predator Free 2050 Limited. And all of that is concerning, because at a time when we should be doubling down on nature investment, we're doing the opposite. However, it's not just all on government. And globally, the scale of nature loss is such that it can't just be governments who come to the party to meet the challenge. Many hands are required. There's absolutely a role for the private sector, there's absolutely a role for philanthropy, there's absolutely a role for communities. And the one thing that I will say about the Predator Free 2050 movement, since it was launched to great fanfare back in 2016, New Zealand at that time already had one of the highest global rates of conservation volunteerism on the planet. which is something very special about this country and we should all be very proud of. And since that time, it has exploded. What community does not have a little bush restoration group at work? You know, how many of our neighbors are not setting good nature traps or Dock 200s in their backyards? The kind of explosion of that movement across the country is one of the great conservation successes of this generation. And I don't think that a short-term decision by our government to defund conservation is going to take the wind out of our sails.
Yeah, Nathalie, any?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just say I think it's time from a collaboration perspective to kind of level up the game. We've got to get beyond being, you know, okay with volunteerism for protecting nature and our ecosystems. Every single person in this room, regardless of who you work for, who you represent organisation-wise, could become an advocate for valuing the work that is in service to nature. Just starting the conversation that says we need to value the work. Because the more we talk about that, the less politically tolerable it is to wipe out programs like this.
Okay, fantastic. We're down to the last 5 minutes now, so I'd just like to invite each of you to give a concluding thought. What is the most important initiative, lever, or action you would like to see happen, and perhaps to seed the discussion we're going to have in a minute?
Look, and again, in terms of Kayla's work and others, if we could put nature properly valued onto the sovereign balance sheet, and a private sector company started doing that, I think that will be utterly transformative. And I also couldn't have said it any better than these ladies said. I just think there is something existential about New Zealand bird song and the precious. For those of us that have lived, you know, Australian birds, it's like fingernails down a chalkboard. And when I lived in China, it was, you know, there is just something utterly magical about New Zealand bird song, and making that, the benefits of that, accessible to your average Kiwi. I just think when you engage with that, you'll never ever let it go. And I think that groundswell of what's been created, we cannot lose that momentum. And I think we've got to double it up, and certainly from the Next Foundation perspective, we're not going to die wondering in terms of preserving that.
Fantastic.
Well, Andrew kind of stole my answer, so let's measure nature and consider it not just around the cabinet table, but in all of our investment decisions. Because if you're not doing it, your cost-benefit analysis of it is impoverished. But since he said that, I'm going to say something else. I don't know how many of you know this, but New Zealand has one of the largest ocean territories on this planet. It's like the 5th largest ocean territory on the planet in terms of our exclusive economic zone, which is a byproduct of some very intrepid Kiwi negotiators during the negotiations around the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. We and many Pacific Island states have benefited immensely from their efforts to secure us this huge ocean territory. UNCLOS comes with the proviso that that ocean territory must be sustainably managed and for the benefits of conservation. New Zealand currently highly protects less than 0.5% of that territory, which is globally shameful. We're like in joint last place with Russia and China. Not the best. We can be doing a lot better, and our government has signed up internationally to protect 30% of the ocean territory by 2030. So if I can leave you with that and invite you all to our screening of David Attenborough's Ocean, it's something we should all be focused on, because as much as Southwestland Forest can be the lungs of the southern hemisphere, our ocean is just as important when it comes to addressing climate change. I mean, every second breath we take comes from it. Rant over.
Just a radical idea for people who invest and are building a balance sheet. When someone comes knocking trying to sell you time credits, buy them and put them on your balance sheet, because that's how you'll bring visibility to nature.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to give a big thank you to all our panelists. Go read WWF's Nature Positive Report. Have a look at the beautiful photos also provided by WWF, which we'll be putting up on the minute. Go have a look at the Toha network. I did the other day. I've made my little pledge. I'm actually really excited. It feels quite tangible to be giving something to somebody for something I'll be able to see. So yeah, a big ups to you. And yeah, keep up the great work, Andrew, on getting Southwest Fiordland predator-free. I think it's a really exciting opportunity. I've done a lot of great walks there. I'm sure a lot of others have too. Beautiful, beautiful landscape, precious place. And to end by saying, we've talked about nature being a business, but nature being a finance. Of course, all of us must remember that it is our wonderful, beautiful planet. There's only one. It is our home. It is the home of others, and it matters for its own sake. So yeah, ngā mihi, no, huri noa, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Thanks to Kate, and thanks to the panel for a really, really good discussion. Now it's over to you guys. So this is the interactive part where you are sitting in tables. You can move around the tables in a second, but the tables are going to be places where you will do work yourself to answer this question. What are the most important levers to accelerate investment for the transition? So this side of the room is on climate change. This side of the room is on nature. You can move around. By the way, that table down there has got Mike Casey's name on it, but we want you up here to do climate. And Siracela Stansu from EnviroStrat, we want you down there at that table to talk about nature. So shift yourselves around very quickly, and then we're going to start. So just a few ground rules. You've got a facilitator at each table. They're going to provide a brief introduction and ensure the discussion flows. So their job is to make sure that everyone gets a chance to contribute. So the first round is to hear from everyone at the table. There's talking stones sourced from Waiheke Beach in order to get everyone to have a chance to pass around the stone and have their chance to have a say. We'll ring a bell at the end of 15 minutes, and then you go into the mode of saying, okay, let's see if we can agree as a table some things to bring back to the group as a whole. And at the end of that, there'll be a report out session, very short, from the facilitator, and you're going to be asked to basically provide one suggestion to meet this question. Is that okay? Each table's going to have a note taker. Make sure you get a note taker first. They're going to use that Slido, and that's a different QR code than the previous one. So this one links in with notes that you take from the table and the answer to the question. Okay? Everyone, 1 minute to move around. Ready, go. If you want to change tables or stay where you are. Okay, everybody. Otherwise, I'll keep on ringing these Tibetan bells. We're now going to do a process of quick feedback from the tables because it's really nice to hear about what other people are talking about. And it's been lovely to go around the room and seeing lots of energy going into this. So for people who are reporting back, who generally be the facilitators, please keep it brief and around the response to that question. We've got 18 tables, and just for your understanding, we have about 10 minutes or so to do this. So think about how long you want to talk. And if it's more than about 30 seconds, then maybe it's too long. So let's start down this end of the room. We'll start with climate, and we'll work through, and then we'll do nature after that. So let's go down this end. And who is it from here?
Would you like to do it? Yeah. So we're going to talk about... Okay, kia ora everyone. We were talking about a variety of things where we did speak about willingness and appetite and policy, and then we kept coming back to incentives, that comment that Rob had made in his introductory speech. But then we had to check ourselves and go, what's going to be the accelerator? And we really liked some of the comments that Mike was talking about earlier. So we felt that something that would really Accelerate investment would be providing access to finance for consumers, easy access for the energy transition, which would be able to be supported by an all-encompassing comms plan to get consumers and everyday Kiwis behind the plan, and just to get people on board. And maybe whether it's done through gentailers or done through banks, there are funding mechanisms now through banks, but it really comes down to, again, serviceability. So if we've got 2 million households and that demand is created, then that can help pull some levers.
Perfect, thank you. Admirably concise and interesting. Thank you.
Hi everyone. We kind of boiled it down. Our lever, most important lever, was education. We thought better education around the opportunities would lead to better policy, more investment, and really accelerate the transition.
Very short and sweet, thank you. And from this table?
Kia ora koutou. Very similar to the table before, however we called it Bridging the Value and Action Gap through grassroots campaigning, or more amazing resources like Mindful Money's website that help people bridge that gap. Love your work, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for the plug, Alva.
The ad has been received. Rowan from Climate VC Fund. Great table, possibly even better than some of the other ones, but I think we'll see how we go. A number of suggestions from us, a more comprehensive set of both incentives and disincentives, which comes from government, which comes from businesses, a mindset shift that we can actually all do this. This is a collective activity. It is in fact the right thing to do. It is kaitiakitanga to get on with climate response, and we all have a role. See it as something that is making good economic sense. We're investing in better businesses, better products and services, and a really interesting conversation about changing default settings for KiwiSavers to specifically preclude fossil fuels.
Great, thank you, Ron. That's terrific. Over here, so just thanks, Bill.
To keep it brief, I'll read it. Due to the size of the New Zealand market, we need a market maker who can offer up opportunities to large onshore and offshore investors. But that market maker would be very wise to rely upon the due diligence and market intelligence inherent in the New Zealand investment scene.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Bill.
Colin McKinnon, NZ Private Capital. Our group was unanimously behind Joe Kelly and the Centre for Sustainable Finance, and with their initiative to create a taxonomy or a common language to help us with this work.
Thank you. Kate, maybe?
Right, would like to echo all the previous points, but the main area that we thought we need to focus on is educating and kind of our mum and dad investors to get behind the companies that are supporting the transition to a clean future.
Great,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, we had Milford and Vinterbell represented at the table here. Dropping you in it. So we couldn't help but get around the fact that the transition is a question of, it's a social issue. So we talked about the fear of change and the importance of trust. And we kind of arrived on, if we can make investments and products that have a clear incentive for consumers, that is the way forward, especially in terms of returns.
Is it on? Yeah, ready. Kia ora everyone. So we spent a bit of time talking about what Mike covered on the panel and the opportunity that sits within New Zealand, probably more at the consumer level, and how we might incentivise that. So what we came up with was energy literacy instead of financial literacy. So with all the things that Mike talked about, it just makes economic sense for people to start changing to electric appliances, I'll say, but especially around the home, solar panels, electric hot water, all those sorts of things. And we also talked about some innovative financing through banks, through your rates and through electricity companies. And then the last driver was some government incentives, but not just through direct funding, maybe using some underwriting kind of capabilities of the government to provide cheaper finance through to banks or other investors.
Great. Have we done all the climate now?
Did we miss anyone from climate?
Right.
No,
In which case, I will turn to our nature panel.
Actually, round of applause for the climate tables, please.
G'day. We talked a lot about the power of good information to informed investment decisions, and I think as a table we believe strongly in the power of nature and climate disclosures, but the reflection we had was that they need to be simplified but mandatory and standardized to really drive transformation.
Kia ora, Rachel Brown here, SBN. So we had a fabulous conversation about nature and basically landed on it's new for a lot of people, so communication, education at a community level for me feels really frustrating, but it's actually really important. Finding a clear and common language around the value of being stewards and investing in nature. And then changing the measures of returns to try and combat some of that conversation about greed, which is currently in our system. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Similarly to the table before, it was about the return from nature into our lives and how we value nature beyond its financial benefits and all the tangible benefits that nature will have for businesses and throughout the system.
Kia ora tātou. David Hall from Toha Network. Our table's most important lever was storytelling that proves nature's value for an organisation's strategy. And we picked that because it sat behind the other things we discussed, like reporting and disclosure on nature-related risk and showcasing opportunities in the nature-positive space and the monetisation of nature's value where that's possible.
Kia ora, Simon, Pure Advantage. We had 3 points framed up by that we should reframe our metrics around what's emerging on the planetary biosphere, geosphere, whatever. 3 points: that current models don't reflect reality, that we should be looking at distributed models. Number 2, narrative doesn't yet connect to our longer term interests. And number 3, intermediaries could influence, manage and shapeshift some of these levers.
Kia ora, Dean from RIA. We had unanimous agreement on our table pretty much all the way through. But we ended up settling something pretty similar but almost in reverse to one of the tables previously. So nature is a measured, valued asset and a stakeholder we care for and tell great stories about.
Thank you. Great.
Kia ora. So we went around a bit of a circle in terms of starting with education, thinking about education for corporates, for government, for people. We spoke about voting. We spoke about the need for things not to be perfect, to just get started. And what we really did come down to towards the end, though, was around the difference between long-term and short-term, the need for incentives to, drive both from individuals, educating them through understanding the key pieces in with nature now, through to regulation. So really, it was about the incentives to try and bridge that gap between short-term problems and long-term solutions.
Tēnā koutou anō. Our table settled on 3 different points to get across. The first one being that government policy and legislation will have the biggest impact. The second one on a potential voluntary carbon market system similar to the one that's been set up from our Australian cousins. And thirdly, about the younger demographic of influence and pressure that's coming through to customer base on a customer base and how that can have an impact on this transition. Kia ora.
So, round of applause for the nature table.
Thank you, everybody. I think that was really brilliant, actually, how you distilled some pretty complex concepts into some key actionable thoughts. Please do make sure that you do put the notes and the points into that link, because we are going to be creating a post-conference report, and this is going to really help us. This is one of the key outputs from this conference, so thank you again so much. And thank you to the facilitators who have made and helped to make this conversation so impactful. So a big round of applause too to all our facilitators. Thank you. We're drawing to the kind of end of our conference, so again I want to thank you so much for the energy and passion that you've brought to this. I want to give a huge thanks to Rob Campbell for a really fantastic opening speech. I'm hoping to get a copy of it because I think there's so much thought in that that it's really powerful. I also want to thank our two panels, Lachlan and the panelists, and the panelists that I had. I thought everyone was really brilliant. And our staff and volunteers. It's quite a big effort for Mindful Money. We're not a big team, but we do have amazing people, particularly, well, everybody really. Karen, Tash, Sophie, Alex, and Callum, and also our volunteers, Grace and Dan, and Marcelo, who's helped to make everything look so great today. So, and thank you for being just a fantastic audience. You've been really engaged. It's been amazing. We're now going to take a break, and you've got the chance to have a drink and a korero. We will be coming back sharpish. We will start sharpish at 5:15, so that means you really need to be getting over here more like 5:10 past. If you want to stay for the awards and you haven't got a ticket, you can still buy a ticket at the registration desk. But yeah, thank you again, and a big round of applause to everybody.